Welcome everyone to this informal debate and discussion on the issue of voting for Donald Trump. Those in the congregation have no need for me to introduce these two men, but for those who might watch this later, to my left is Pastor Joel Saint, an elder here at Independence Reformed Bible Church, and to my right is John Bingaman, also an elder here at Independence Reformed Bible Church. The question under discussion is this: should Christians vote for Donald Trump, specifically in 2024? The format for this informal debate will be as follows. John will argue in the affirmative and will begin with an opening statement of no more than 8 minutes, more or less. Then Joel will give his opening statement arguing in the negative. Then we will move to a somewhat loose discussion between the two, including questions from the congregations. Questions will be taken via text message. I shared that number earlier. If you don't have a cell phone, go see Jeff. He can text your question in. We will conclude with brief closing statements from both sides. It was 8 years ago in this room in 2016 that Joel preached an Election Day sermon. And during the Q&A, there was a rather spirited exchange between Pastor Joel and a congregant regarding Donald Trump. It wasn't something you see every day in church, and nor is this discussion. But I remember Joel saying to me afterwards, these conversations are going to happen, and they either happen here in the church or they'll happen outside it. So why not have them here where we can encourage and challenge one another to think biblically about all things? One more thing that should go without saying, given that these are two elders of the same church discussing this, I'd still like to emphasize this is not an issue that ought to cause us to break fellowship. However, that doesn't mean we cannot disagree heartily and discuss this topic. Iron sharpens iron. So with that said, we'll begin, and John, you have the floor to make your opening statement on why you believe Christians should vote for Donald Trump.
Okay, thanks, Chris. That's very unusual for me to be sitting in opposition to Joel. I mean, we've started this in 2013, and it's, like I said, it's really unusual for us to be on opposite sides of any particular issue. The other thing I'd like to say is this is more along the lines of, may a Christian vote for Donald Trump? Is there a biblical warrant for voting for Donald Trump, as opposed to the 30 million Christians that are reportedly going to be sitting out this election because they can't even hold their nose and vote for Donald Trump. So that being said, we'll go back to 2016 that you mentioned. At that time, I didn't vote for Trump. I didn't vote for Hillary either. I didn't had any idea what Trump would do. He has been an adulterer. He was wishy-washy, really weak on abortion, and so I couldn't vote for Donald Trump. With that being said, Joel and I would both agree that God is sovereign over all, and he raises up kings and he breaks them down, as it says in the Bible. And at that point, my vote really didn't matter. He rose up Donald Trump in 2016 and defeated Hillary Clinton. In 2020, he did the same with Biden, maybe. But in any event, we've had 4 years of Biden and Harris to look at. So, despite understanding that God raises up kings, he directs the kings even when they're in authority, the question ends up being, how should we look at this? What kind of biblical warrant can we find to be participating at all in these elections? We're not dealing with covenant keepers on either side of this election. At our recent Future of Christendom conference, we talked a bit about, we had a panel discussion, and we had 4 good men saying they couldn't possibly vote for Trump, and we had 2 saying that we must vote for Trump. The reality of the Bible is one of the things that drew me into Christianity. As many of you know, I came to Christianity very late. I was 40 when I became a Christian. Is the Bible true? Was something that I really struggled with. Is it true? How could it be true? And over time, as I kept reading it, I was compelled to read it, but over time, I accepted the reality of the Bible's inspiration, because if men had written this, it wouldn't have described reality. Everything that you read, it covers warts and all. And so men would not write that. If you were trying to induce somebody to become religious or to follow your point of view, you would not write all the warts in that the Bible does. And so we are having to deal with reality here. And one of the panelists at the Future of Christendom conference said, this isn't binary. It's not either or. And he made the point that we are voting for somebody, and if you're going to make a vote for Donald Trump, you're voting for his abortion policies and for everything else that he stands for. But I disagree to a point in that it is binary. Like it or not, the reality of this election is that we're going to be left with Trump or Harris on the day after. That's the reality that we're dealing with. So I'm looking at it thinking, so where do I find my biblical warrant? I understand the arguments, and Joel will make those shortly, about not voting for Donald Trump. But in my mind, we're living here in America under judgment. It seems very clear to me that we are living under God's judgment for how we've lived in these last several generations. And that brings us back to the point where that's where we are right now. We've got a choice between Trump and Harris. Not particularly good choices. I'm not crazy about Donald Trump, but I'm even less crazy about Kamala Harris. So in that we're living under the judgment, it seems to me that we need to focus less on the election and more on the electorate. Our goal as Christians here is to convert the nation, to transform the nation Christward, so that we get candidates that we can be comfortable with. Living under judgment, I go to Jeremiah 29, where Jeremiah encouraged the Israelites who were in Babylon under judgment, clearly under judgment, to settle down, have kids, live their lives, and work for the good of the society that they were living in. That's what they were commanded to do. They had 70 years that they were going to be there under that judgment. So I think that can give us some warrant to say, hey, here we live under judgment. Let's do the best that we can given the choices that we're being given. I look at Daniel living in Babylon, working well for the king. Those are not situations of election. They didn't get to elect, but they were given opportunities to serve and to live and to live out the best lives that they could. So I look at that. I have a couple of proverbs here that I've been looking at. A prudent person sees evil and hides himself. So if I'm going to be prudent, I'm going to look at the two candidates that we have. I'm going to hide myself from the one if I can. It seems clear to me that although Trump is not a Christian man, his policies, as he evidenced during his 4 years, he's not intent on enacting anti-Christian policy, whereas Harris certainly would be. So I'm trying to hide myself from her. I look at Proverbs 24:11. It says, "Rescue those who are being taken away to death, and those who are staggering to the slaughter, oh, hold them back." So with Harris's insistence on the transgender stuff, also on abortion, and our nation, maybe half our nation, maybe 40% of our nation, eager to also participate in that kind of thing, I would like to hold them back from being able to engage in that.
One more minute, John.
Okay. And then Proverbs 16, the fury of a king is like messengers of death, but a wise person will appease it. We're stuck here. We have to live under the government that we're being judged with, and so appease it. And then my final appeal to this would be loving one's neighbor, because it seems to me that we often talk about this. If you've heard me teach on economics, what people say doesn't matter as much as what they do. It describes their values, what they do. We had an opportunity to see what Trump did for 4 years. His appointments were decent, and the judges, the people that he put in authority were decent. He didn't work against Christianity. We've seen 4 years of what Harris Biden would do, and they did act against Christians at every turn. So for me, that's where I am, and I think that we have biblical warrant to support Trump.
Thank you, John. Again, if you have questions as you're listening to these opening statements, text them in. If you don't know the number, go see Jeff. And now Joel will give his opening statement, approximately 8 minutes, in the negative.
Okay. Am I hot? Not hot yet. Hot, there we go. Okay. All right, yeah, thank you, John. I want to thank John for participating in this with me, and thank you, Chris, and all you that encourage us to do this. Thank you all for coming out here this morning for something like this. The first thing I want to say is that this is very difficult stuff, and here's the reason why. We talk about a vote as if it's a private thing, but we act as if it's a public thing. That's how we all act. And when we argue about voting, or more accurately, casting a ballot, what we will say to each other is, why are you not voting for X candidate? And then we act as if you not voting for X candidate is actually voting for the other candidate. That's how we act. And unless you vote the way I want you to vote, I see that as an attack. Now, we don't want to say it that way, but that is how we discuss things. And my guess is everybody here has been in that kind of discussion already. If you don't vote for Donald Trump, then you're voting for communist law Harris. So let's understand that. When it comes to casting a ballot, it's not a private thing in that sense. It's very, very public. There's another thing that I want to talk about, and that is a view of reality, if you will. I've heard it said that Trump did real well because under Trump, Roe versus Wade was reversed. And that's true. And that under Trump, we've had pro-life judges appointed, which, depending on how you want to define pro-life, I guess we have. Here's the thing. While we say at one point, and this is the reality that I want to focus on here. While we say at one point that this is really good that Roe versus Wade was reversed, and it's really good that pro-life judges were appointed, the reality is that the babies are in just as great danger or greater danger than they've ever been. So while we say on one hand, oh good, we got when Roe versus Wade had nothing to do with it anyway, quite frankly, well, it had something to do with it, but Roe didn't matter in the end because nobody cared. So we say on the one hand, great to have these judges, but the reality is the babies are in just as much danger today or even more, because what Dobbs did was to throw it back to the states. That's what Roe did. Roe took it away from the states. Now it's back to the states, and what are the states doing? Many states are implanting abortion rights, R-I-T-E-S, in their state legislatures. So we got to ask a question. While it looks like Trump did some good things, did he ultimately help the babies? He's already compromised on the babies multiple times. He blamed people that want to ban abortion, for example, for costing candidates elections during the last congressional cycle. So here's what I want to share with you here. This is from Steve Halbrook, and as part of my opening statement. Trump supporters, it is a given that Harris hates you. I'm not endorsing her, but let's not pretend that Trump doesn't hate you either. This is some pretty stiff material here. While president, he ferociously waged war against you. Please consider if your support is based on reality or what you want to be true. I'm going to stop there for a moment. I want to vote for Trump. I don't know if you saw his act at McDonald's in Lancaster.
Yeah.
It was good. And I was like, man, I want to vote for this guy. I don't know if you heard his line. Now I've worked 15 minutes more than Kamala Harris. Did anybody catch that? That's good. Okay, a few things. Trump did not pardon those supporters unjustly arrested for the supposed January 6th insurrection in D.C., despite Trump urging them to attend the protest. Still sticks deeply in my craw. He hardly ever spoke up for those, very peripherally spoke up for those folks, unjustly imprisoned, political prisoners. Trump told his followers he would drain the swamp. Instead, he grew it more than ever with the COVID scamdemic. I don't think that can possibly be argued against. In his first presidential campaign, Trump talked about locking up Hillary Clinton. Once he won, he refused to do so. Instead, he promoted the COVID scamdemic narrative that resulted in locking all of us up. That happened. I'll skip some, how many thousands of Trump's followers have died or will die due to the Trump COVID vaccine, which Trump recommended that they get, and hasn't backed away from yet? Has not backed away from that. A lethal injection that he dishonestly claims has saved millions of lives, and he still claims that. And then Halbrook goes on to say this: while it is wrong to support Trump pragmatically as the lesser of two evils, of course that's what we're arguing about here, if you still support him, at least have the integrity to admit that he is a lying murderer instead of acting as if he supports the people. And again, maybe that's what we're talking about here. Is he actually a lying murderer? Might as well lay it out here. Trump pretending to be your friend is the oldest political trick in the book. How many genocidal tyrants did not start out as men of the people? And nobody's better at presenting himself as a man of the people, I don't think, than Donald Trump. Oh, yeah. Nobody is better at that. He doesn't come off like a billionaire to me at all. He comes off to me like the guy next door, whose dog got out and he wants me to help him get it back in his yard. Here's the thing. I know we want to be. It's a difficult thing to mix principle with pragmatism. It's a hard thing to do. A vote for Donald Trump, I think John would agree with me, is a pragmatic vote. It's not a principled vote. I'll let you give you a chance to come back on that. That is what we're up against here, a pragmatic vote here. Let me make this brief argument in conclusion. It may be that pragmatically speaking, that a Harris administration might actually cause the Republicans to grow a spine, if you can imagine something like that. Use your imagination. Here's the thing. The Republicans keep on offering up the lesser of two evils. And we keep complaining about the lesser of two evils. We keep complaining, and what do we keep doing? We keep voting for what we complain about. We keep doing it. And I, for one, I'm done. That's it.
Thank you, Joel. Okay, again, if you have questions, see Jeff or text them in. And the goal here is for you two to interact as much as possible. So I'm going to ask one question to start, and then feel free to respond and question one another and get into a discussion. This question is, does the debate boil down to which candidate are we more likely to be able to live a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty? And I would just add, is that how we should be thinking about this, or should we be viewing it as in the terms of biblical qualifications for a magistrate? Should we be focused on what is more likely to give us an opportunity to live a quiet and peaceable life, or should we be asking about biblical qualifications? So I'll let John respond to that first, and then feel free to interact.
Yeah. If we're gonna wait for candidates that have biblical qualifications, we can just drop out of voting altogether, and that's just where we are. We haven't seen biblically qualified candidates in our lifetimes. So that is part of the pragmatism that I'm being accused of, but what my argument earlier was that the pragmatism is enabled by the fact that we're already living under judgment. So for me, living quiet and peaceably under an administration allows us time to try to Christianize the society that we live in, that we might get better candidates. So that's the short answer for me.
Yeah, I think it sounds like the way the question was set up, do we, kind of like an either or, and can I possibly do a both end?
Well, there you go.
Can I possibly say, you know what, I'm going to vote for biblically qualified candidates, which I do. It's not like I don't vote, or cast a ballot, I should say. Let me clarify that. I make a distinction between casting a ballot and actually voting. The vote doesn't happen until some crooked person counts the vote. Casting a ballot is when I go in and I fill out something. I take a pen or a pencil with me, and I write principal people in. I don't know how many times I voted for John Bingaman for president or senator, something like that.
As we said, God raises them up and casts them down.
And many of you here have been voted for by me inside that little booth there. Can I do the right thing in the ballot box and trust God for the results? Or do I have to compromise Exodus 18, hoping for evil, but not so much evil? John, I'd like to ask you, if Bill Clinton were running against Donald Trump, what would you do?
Yeah, I'd still have to vote for Trump.
You still have to vote for Trump?
Yeah, I would.
I mean, Bill Clinton, at least at the time, wasn't messing around with transgender stuff, and Trump doesn't seem to have a problem with it.
Agreed. I mean, I understand it's tough, except that Bill Clinton was a serial adulterer, and we know that Trump was married at least several times, and we don't know that he was a serial adulterer. There are credible stories about some really awful goings on in Arkansas prior to his coming. I mean, the trail of bodies following the Clintons around is just beyond the pale. So,
sure.
But let me then turn around and ask you, given that Solomon built a temple to Milcom, would you vote for Solomon?
No.
And yet Solomon is held up as a paragon here in the Bible. It's part of the warts and all that I've been talking about.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the wisest man who ever lived is not good enough for you.
Well, the wisest... He wasn't too wise when he was building...
Honestly.
That was a pretty seriously unwise thing to do. So at least at that point, he would have gotten my vote early on.
Yeah.
But he wouldn't have gotten my vote later on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would have adjusted my casting my ballot to the character of the man, which is what it seems Exodus 18 is calling us to do.
And that may be. Yeah. I mean, it's so difficult to take a look at Exodus 18 and say, okay, there's certainly a prescription here for what constitutes a godly candidate, but have we ever seen one?
Well, I think I have. But, I've seen men like that. They may not have been candidates, but that didn't stop me from voting for him.
Yeah, Ron Paul got as close as anybody.
Excuse me?
Ron Paul got as close as anybody.
Yeah.
In my mind.
Yeah, mine as well.
Yeah.
All right, good. Let's keep that up. Let me ask this question, sort of building on the last one. John, it's directed towards you. Is this an endorsement of pure and universal political pragmatism? And then there's a follow-up, does this lead you to reject abortion abolitionism, which I don't know if you hold or not, as a philosophical system?
Yeah, no, the answer is no, I don't reject abolitionism. And no, I'm not advocating necessarily for pure political pragmatism. I want to advocate for Christian candidates. I do. I crave being able to vote for a Christian candidate. However, I heard an argument from a guy that I'm not particularly crazy about, but I thought it was an interesting argument, talking about how in the primaries we need to really try to be as principled as possible in order to get a candidate there. But then once we're faced with the final choices, we still have to make a choice. And so that's an interesting view of how to be principled and pragmatic at this, in your ballot casting, not voting, right. Ballot casting activities. So, yeah.
Quick point, a parallel point, if you will. I do question even casting ballots at this point. I question it. My reason is I believe there's so much cheating going on. It's almost as if I go in and I cast a ballot and I act as if cheating isn't happening.
Yeah.
And that is very painful for me. I'm going in there and I do my little due diligence to fill out my little thing and so forth. And I'm acting as if this means something. Yeah. We know that the deep state is running things. This we absolutely know.
No, Sleepy Joe's running it.
Yeah.
He's running the free world, he told us.
Everybody's sitting around waiting for Joe Biden at the conference table. What does he think? My goodness, he's drooling someplace. Let's be honest, come on. Here's the thing, and you all may recall this, Biden wasn't even the leader in the primary back in 2020.
True.
When the other guys all dropped out. You might remember that. Communist Law Harris was getting nowhere. You might remember that. She wasn't getting any traction whatsoever. So now what happens is we get the guy who was left over, who's controllable, as president or resident, and as vice president, who got no support at all, is now the supposed front runner. So we've got this deep state running everything, and we're being told to go out and vote because it makes a difference. Mm-hmm. I have a really hard time seeing the difference.
I want to just elaborate on that, and this is a bunny trail, so I'll keep it as quick as I can. So we all know that the COVID was a scam. It was a worldwide conspiracy, and it really pulled back the curtain, and everybody said, oh yeah, the deep state, and we see it. But doesn't that just raise a whole lot more questions? So how far back do you have to go for the last one? The 2008, 7 and 8 and 9 financial crisis was brought to, that was absolutely a conspiracy. The banks were failing and they needed to shovel money, and they did. Let's go back to the World Trade Center. The buildings fall straight down, and we're supposed to believe that well, that's the way buildings fall down when they get hit by a plane, including the one that didn't get hit by a plane. Okay, then we go back, and you go back, and you go back. JFK. Oh, everybody at this point says there's no way that Lee Harvey Oswald was a single shooter who killed him, and okay, that's all buried. Then let's go back a little bit more. Let's go back to World War II. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and now in declassified documents, we know that FDR knew that for at least a week prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor, and yet did nothing. So how far back? Federal Reserve, the income tax. The income tax is supposedly brought to us by the 13th Amendment, which is now proved that they never actually ratified that. So it just goes on and on and on. How long has this been? So yeah, I agree with you. Are we just pretending all along? Sorry.
Not that I want to get into an agree fest, but I definitely agree with every word of that.
My tinfoil hat's in my briefcase.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question to follow up on that. We got a lot of great questions coming in. Related to what you're saying, I think, John, if Christians keep voting for the GOP candidate, why would the GOP ever put forward a qualified candidate? I mean, Joel made the claim that there are qualified people out there. They might not be on the Democrat or Republican ticket, but if Christians keep voting for someone who's not qualified, why would the two-party system ever put forward someone who is?
It gets back to my point about being much more concerned as Christians about the electorate than about the elections. We need to Christianize this world, and you're not going to get qualified Christian candidates until people in the aisles insist on that. And that's going to be a bottom-up kind of a thing. The other belief for me, and you're talking about Republicans versus Democrats, is I think that similar to the era of the war between the states, you have a political realignment going on. Up until the 1840s, you had the Democrat and you had the Whigs, right? And the Whigs just disappeared and the Republicans came to the fore. It was a political realignment. And what we're watching here is a political realignment between big government and small government in the populist versus elitist. And so I think that there's a chance that a populist leader would could have Christian qualifications. There's a chance of that, but not a big one. We also need to recognize that this cult of personality that we see around Donald Trump is eerily reminiscent of Hitler. I'm not saying that Donald Trump is Hitler. What I'm saying is that when you look at the newsreels from the 1930s and the adoring crowds who were cheering Adolf Hitler, and you look at today's newsreels with these rallies for Trump, it's similar. It's a cult of personality, and that's a dangerous thing. And that's where you were saying earlier about how populism turns into despotism.
And remember, John's the one arguing for a vote for Trump. Go ahead, Joel.
I didn't say that Trump is Hitler. I did not say that. I did not mean that.
Did not.
Did
You
not
did not
mean to imply that.
That's about as good as a qualification we're going to get. He ain't Hitler, vote for him. That's a little strong on my part.
That's all right. I hit you with Solomon.
All right, well, I'll ask a follow-up question, Joel, and I want you to respond to this. I'm just going to ask this question just to follow up on this one more time. This came in. It seems that every week we pray for the removal of wicked leaders. Is there any reason to question that God would heed these prayers rather than giving us the evil leaders that we ourselves have chosen? To follow up on that, John, and I would like you to respond, Joel, you said until the people insist on a qualified candidate, we won't have one. But if we keep voting for one who isn't, what does it mean to insist on that biblical candidate?
What I'm talking about is that the nominating process, that primary process, would have to reach down into the county and city levels. If we have a Christian populace, it's going to first show up in the mayor's office and at city council and on school boards, and from there those people graduate to state legislatures or county commissioners or some county presidents, depending on where you live, and so the candidates rise. Donald Trump's rise to power is unprecedented in American history. To go from being a businessman in New York to being president, that just didn't happen. It just hasn't happened prior to this. Take a look at I can't even say his name, the Secretary of the Transportation, right? He was a mayor, and so his rise to national prominence comes from his mayorship, or maybe more from his homosexuality, which is now politically protected and celebrated. Nonetheless, he came from down below, and that's where it's going to show up. That's how we have to get there.
Tell you the question again, sorry.
Every week we pray for the removal of wicked leaders. Should we expect God to heed that prayer if we choose these leaders?
I'd have to say no. How can we choose the people we ask God to remove? I don't know how I can do that. I can't think of a way. So that's my short answer.
All right, two separate questions, but very similar. So I'm going to put these together to one. It's directed to John. I'm going to reword it for Joel as well. So John, what would Trump have to do or believe for you to not vote for him? And Joel, what would Trump have to do for you to vote for him? So we'll start with John. How bad would it have to be for you not to vote for Donald Trump?
Yeah.
Or not to vote for either one?
Not to vote for either one. Yeah. I think that if he were to have rolled up a abortion ban at the Republican National Convention, that would have certainly been over the top. I think that if he were to parade drag queens for Trump, like they're doing for Harris, I think that would probably do it. There are a number of things. I mean, if he was to, shoot somebody live on TV, that would probably disqualify him.
I don't know. It depends on who it was.
Yeah. I just really wasn't. I thought of that, but I wasn't going to go there. That's why you're the lead elder.
Get away with that stuff. Yeah. What would he have to do in order for me to vote for him? Yeah. If he were to declare and say, you know what would be helpful is that whole Operation Warp Speed was deadly.
Oh yeah.
And I'm so ashamed of it. That would be helpful. That'd be helpful. Here's where I could support him. Stand up and say, you know what? I've read the Bible. I've read Exodus 18. I believe in Christ. And I believe the only person qualified is a person who hates bribes, one who fears God, and one from among you. And that's what I want to be. And I say, Big Don, you got my vote now, bro. You have all my support. Even if this whole thing is a charade, I'm still going to support you with everything I have. That's what he would have to do in order to get my support.
Text just came in, follow-up question on that, so I'm going to ask it. It's about Donald Trump. What about promoting IVF and offering to pay for it? And I will say, by the way, with moderator privilege, Donald Trump may not have said trans for Trump, but he did do that with homosexuals.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Donald Trump may not have said, transgenders for Trump, but he did do that for homosexuals. He did try to garner that vote. So I'd like you to respond to both of those, John and then Joel.
Yeah, the IVF thing, of course, is it's an awful procedure, and I agree that it's a problem. It's just as much a problem as his stand on abortion. I have any idea whether he'll follow through on that any more than I have ideas on how he'll follow through on abortion. To me, a lot of what he says is absolutely pandering for votes. So, I mean, that's but you're right, it's problematic. There's no question that there's a problem here. I am simply relying, and I've said this really up front, it's a pragmatic vote for me because it gives us a little bit of time to try to turn the ship.
Could I get the question again? I'm sorry.
Question was Donald Trump's position on IVF.
Yeah, that is so troubling because IVF makes it possible for homosexuals and lesbians to have families, which is just an outrage. It's outrageous, and it's murderous because they take these extra embryos, they throw them in the trash can.
Or use them for research.
Yeah, use for research, which is it's also ghastly. It's beyond even polite conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, to clarify, Donald Trump was not saying, we need to go in and rescue these children that are currently frozen, but we need to continue this apparatus of creating more and more frozen embryos. So, big distinction there. Okay. Start with Pastor Joel on this one. Congregant says, I vote for Trump to choose my judgment. similar to what David did when God asked him to choose his judgment. Is that biblical?
Yeah. So little background. David went and numbered the people, and that he specifically was not able to do that, and it was so obvious that even Joab figured it out that you shouldn't be doing this. God then judges David, gives him a couple choices. Do you want to run before your enemies before 3 days, or do you want to have a plague? And of course, David says, you know what? I think God's going to have more mercy on me than my enemies. I'll choose the plague. So he chose his judgment in that way. I could almost live with that if that's how it was presented. Hey, everybody, we're under judgment here. Choose your judgment. The problem is, I don't know, I honestly don't know which judgment is worse. Let me do the pragmatic argument once again. You say, you're crazy, Joel. How can Trump be worse than Harris? Let me present something for you. If Hillary would have done the stuff that Trump did during his administration, the Republicans would have been all up in arms, as they should have been. But since it was a Republican doing it, got away with it. All that money printed up to hand out to people, all that money he voted into existence, we'd have been screaming about that if it would have been Hillary, as we should have been. Operation Warp Speed, we would have been screaming about it. But it's our guy, it's our Republican. So I think the pragmatic argument, it can actually go both ways. Anybody remember who the first governor was to lock down a state? It wasn't Wolf, a good Democrat. It was Mike DeWine, right next door in Ohio. But it was a Republican, and we protect Republicans, so it must have been the right thing to do. I urge you to, I say that for your consideration. Think about it. Did I answer the question?
Sure. And John can respond, and again, feel free to challenge one another.
On the choosing the judgment, we're under judgment. We've got to choose somebody. And I simply, again, I go to the pragmatic. I'm looking to buy some time for the church to get its act together. God raises him up. My vote ultimately is in his hands. My ballot is ultimately in his hands. And if he raises up Kamala Harris, K-Mala in Spanish means how bad. K-Mala. If he raises her up.
Wait a minute. I don't want people to miss that. I'd not heard that before. K-Mala means how bad in Spanish?
In Espanol. So if he raises her up, we know where God stands on America. If he raises up Trump, he might be giving us a bit of a reprieve. I don't have, people look at the assassination attempt to say, certainly Trump was spared for this moment. Who knows? Yes, it's providential. You can't argue that. But for this, I don't know. I am not arguing that Donald Trump is an ideal candidate. I am arguing the pragmatic view.
Yeah, and to follow up, to try to answer the question better, God is the one that came and said to David, here are your two choices. I have not yet gotten that particular communication when it comes to Harris and Trump from God.
Yeah, both are a judgment.
Yeah.
Directed to Joel first. This is based on, I think, your comments about Roe v. Wade and then Dobbs. Joel, you appear to be against states' rights. How do you justify the federal government telling states what to do?
Yeah. Well, if you have a federal government, then it's going to tell the states what to do. At some point, it's going to do that. Otherwise, it's not a federal government. Now, I understand the original, 10 amendments and so forth in the original Constitution, which was not passed unanimously. I understand that people argued about the power of the federal government. To this day, my favorite founder is Patrick Henry, because he felt that the federal government was had way too much power. And maybe it looks as if time proved him correct. Love Patrick Henry. Here's the thing. If you're going to have a government, if you're going to have a federal government, maybe the first thing you want to do is tell everybody you're not going to kill babies. If you as a federal government can't do that, then we definitely don't need you.
Yeah, my view on that is that I believe that the Dobbs ruling was correct in sending it back to the states. However, they neglected to deal with the issue of the baby's life. What we're dealing with here is murder, and every state should recognize abortion as being murder. It's taking a life. So that's really the question that Christians are bringing to the fore with abolition. You're dealing with a life from conception. The fact that the states don't recognize life, that the states won't recognize murder when it's happening in their state is an issue. The states are charged with developing a criminal code and what the punishments are for murder. And back when people were sane, abortion was murder, and you were punished for that. But the Dobbs ruling, as far as it went in sending it back to the states, recognizing the states' rights, is a step in the right direction. But they really needed to deal with the issue of life and when it begins.
Well, John, let me ask you then, would you say it's fair to say that both Trump and Harris believe in murder, but we should support Trump because he doesn't believe in as much murder as Harris does?
It's sorta. Yeah, I mean, the Constitution deals and the Declaration deals with life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Life. But whoever thought you'd have to define life? But that's where we're coming to in our culture.
All right, keep the questions coming in. Let's see here. If we choose not to vote for Trump for conscience sake, is it wrong to pray that he will win? I'll let you do that first, Joel.
Yeah, I think that is the question that exposes, I think, the weakest part of my argument right there. I think that does. Because, wait a minute, Joel, are you kind of quietly hoping, okay, you've got this principled stand that's hard to come against. I'm voting principle, baby. Wait a minute, in the quietness of your house, are you kind of quietly hoping that Trump wins? I think that's the weakness of my position. I think if there is a weakness, I think that's it. Do I hope Trump wins? Yeah, I do. Let me come across here and say, here's a problem with my position. Back when Bush was running for the second time, I think it was Bush 41. I forget who he was up against. But I heard a missionary in Africa say that if Bush wins this election, and this is where the pragmatism thing, I think it's very difficult for pragmatism not to be out there somewhere. It's tough. And see, at that point then, John has a point, I think. Here, let me explain. This missionary said, Northern Sudan, which at that time was the largest country in Africa, geography-wise, keeps on punishing Southern Sudan, which is mostly Christian. They keep sending armies against them. Southern Sudan had the oil and the jungles. Northern Sudan had the no oil and the deserts. So you know how that's going to work out. And this missionary said, if Bush wins the second time, this is Bush 41, this is Herbert Walker Bush, not the first one. If he wins the second term, then Southern Sudan will be able to become their own country. That's going to happen. And I thought of the Christians there, and I thought of what's going on, and I went out and I made a pragmatic vote for George. I forget who he was up against.
Clinton.
Who was? Do we even remember?
The second time, Clinton.
No, the second time. I forget who was up against. First time, no.
H.W. Bush was only a one-term president. He succeeded Reagan.
Okay, then it would have been the first one. No.
And then Clinton
no,
followed him.
No, this is Bush.
George W.
too.
Bush.
Yeah, George W.
The second one.
The second one, yeah. Bush
oh.
too. Anyway, in any case, I went out and I did that, and that did work out. And I felt it was good for those Christians at that time. So am I allowed to hope that Harris doesn't win and still not vote for Trump? I think I can be allowed to do that. If there's a clash between my principle and my desires, the principles have to win out.
This is reminiscent, Joel, of an argument that you frequently make about our Mennonite friends who rely on the police despite their non-aggression, their pacifism, but they're happy that the police show up to enforce the law. And that, that's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, you're right. You're right about that.
I mean, it's
right. Difference is
how are you going to feel on Wednesday the 6th
Yeah.
if Harris wins?
Yeah.
Versus how are you going to feel on Wednesday the 6th if Trump wins?
Of course, you know what I believe about that. Harris wins no matter what. If in the beginning it looks like Trump wins, I think we're going to see the riots. I believe that. I think we'll see the people out on the street. And I think we'll see the Supreme Court bail the second time, like they did the first time, just bail. And so I believe that Harris wins no matter what. That's what I believe is going to happen. I think you'll see the riots, and you'll see the rioters very much organized, and you'll see the Trump supporters very disorganized. And what's going to happen is the Trump supporters will ultimately give way because they will choose peace over principle, which is what we've been doing pretty much throughout my lifetime.
Patrick Henry, peace, peace, but there is no peace. He quoted Jeremiah right in his speeches. Yeah.
Question came in. Do you believe Trump fears God and hates bribes? I think I know the answer from both, but I want to add a follow-up to that. What is our responsibility when it comes to choosing leaders? We see that in Scripture. Choose men who will rule over you. Is it different in the civil realm than it is in the church? Would you make the same argument, John, that we have two unqualified candidates, but you vote for one to be an elder? Would that be the same argument you make in the church as in the civil realm? And if not, explain why.
No, we're not electing a pope. We're not electing a pastor. This is a civil issue, and we hear an awful lot growing up. I can remember sitting in second grade in Miss Hunter's class. I sat in the third row back on the left side, talking about our sacred responsibility of voting, that it was a sacred duty to vote. It's not. It's a civic duty, but it's not a sacred duty. And I don't believe that what we're doing here is electing a religious leader. Now, I believe, just as you guys believe, that our civil magistrates are supposed to protect the Bible. They're supposed to protect the church, the true church. That's clear from Scripture. But we haven't had that in a long time either. But no, I don't believe that we're electing an elder here or an ecclesiastical leader.
John, can I ask you?
Yeah.
Is it possible that a Trump administration could actually do more damage to the cause of Christ than the Harris administration?
Absolutely, because, and this is my big fear about a Trump victory, is that people breathe a sigh of relief and sit back. And that all it does is give the crazies, the communists, the anarchists, all the people who are in authority now, time to consolidate because we're not active. The most important thing that we could possibly do, regardless of who wins, is to continue to be more active in our communities, to continue to be more active in evangelism, and try to build a grassroots, bottom-up Christian movement in this country that will give us candidates. It's a huge fear of mine that Trump wins and we all sit back, that the whole nation just, okay, it's all over, and in 4 years it comes back worse. Absolutely, I absolutely believe that.
I want to clarify something. I do think this is a really important part of the debate, and so I would like you to respond, Joel, because you didn't necessarily respond to that question I just asked.
Okay.
It wasn't whether or not we're voting for a pastor or an elder, but do we vote for qualified candidates only, or do we make pragmatic choices? Obviously, that's, I believe, your position. This is a pragmatic decision. Should that be the way we also view electing people in other areas? So we're not voting for a pastor, but there are biblical qualifications. Does that apply when we cast our ballot in the civil realm? Or should we vote based on pragmatic precept, what might happen?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Here's the thing. When I come out of the voting booth, I have a clear conscience if I wrote in people that I believe fear God and hate covetousness. I can come out with a clear conscience. If I'm voting for evil, which, let's face it, the lesser of two evils is still evil. If I'm voting for evil, then I myself can't have a clear conscience. Now, what I heard, and I just saw a video on this. A couple guys were talking about why you should vote for Trump, and they were saying, and this is what they did. Kind of tricky. I liked them, but they were a little tricky. This is what happened. This is what they did. They said, look, Exodus 18 says, fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, men from among you, right? And they went on to say, this is why you got to vote for Donald Trump. And they went on to say then, well, you can't find a perfect candidate. Do you see the little twist going on there? Do you see that? Can you really find someone that Exodus 18 requires? Nobody's perfect, so just do the best you can with what you got. Man, I thought that was awfully tricky. Is it possible to find a man of truth who fears God, who hates covetousness from among you? Well, if you can't do that, then it seems to me it doesn't matter who you vote for, who you don't vote for. If those people don't exist, if they don't exist, you're busted no matter what. Are we actually saying that those people don't exist? I'm definitely not saying that. And I'm saying when I go in the voting booth that I am supporting those people, whether or not they have a chance to win.
I think that in our system of Republican democracy, the way it's designed, especially in the two-party system, you will inevitably get candidates who are venal, vile people. It's because those are the people who are attracted to leadership positions in our Republican democracy.
Positions of power.
Positions of power.
Yeah.
They want to lord it over others. I've been arguing for a long time, and you can imagine that in the 90s, I would say to people, we are on the verge of turning into Nazi Germany, and they would look at me like I had two heads. And I said, no, look at it. If you were to advertise for a building inspector, the position for a building inspector, the line would go around the block. Why? Because they can tell you what to do with your property. They want that. They would trip over themselves. They would cheat. They would lie. They would steal to get that position because they want. That's where we are as a nation, and we're there because our system has funneled us there. So what we need is more of a theocratic government. It may very well be that the United States is too large to govern. At 330 million people, it may be too large to properly govern under the system that we're operating now, which is highly centralized. A centralized government cannot work.
John,
we were designed as a federal, decentralized government, and everything that we see in our society today, our culture, including megachurch pastors falling like flies, is because of centralization. A little church like this, if you step out of line, you're going to be caught quickly You know,
One would hope.
Right, and there's not a 15-person elder board and an executive committee to circle the wagons to protect you. So that's by centralizing the government. Abraham Lincoln did us an enormous disservice because he centralized the power in the federal government, and that has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the centralization is what gives us the trouble. So, I mean,
John, I wonder if you could.
I'm ranting. I'm sorry.
I wonder if you could comment on a comment I've made. Just ask for your response to this. I have said in the past that the Republicans would vote for a demon as long as the Democrats put up the devil. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's Tweedledum and Tweedledee in most cases. I think that the Biden-Harris administration is so far over the top. I mean, I'm 70 years old. I have not seen, I can't imagine, I couldn't have imagined what we're watching now. Right. When I was a boy, or even a young man, I could not have imagined what we're looking at now. Donald Trump is a liberal, awful guy until you stand him next to Kamala Harris. I mean, that's where I am. But when we're looking at Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford in 1976, they were Tweedledum, Tweedledee. It really couldn't have mattered. Carter was a very ineffective president because he was so indecisive, and Gerald Ford was there because he was convenient after the whole Watergate mess. Richard Nixon versus George McGovern didn't matter. Those kinds of things. And there's something different this time as well. And I don't like to say that this time it's different. That I've rebelled against that most of my adult life. This time, I'm afraid it is different.
A few minutes left. We might have to do this again next week. I got more questions coming in. For both of you men, which view would you suggest has the best long-term view? And I think the two views in the question are voting for Trump now as a lesser of two evils, if you will, or being principled and refusing to vote for someone who you understand to not be qualified per the Bible. Which one has the best long-term view? And the follow-up question from the same person is, if we vote for Trump, isn't that more of a slow boil in the pot of taking us further and further down the road in statism? So which position is best for the long-term view?
Well, yeah, mine is, so there you go, that's easy. Here's the thing. We've been voting for lesser of two evils all my life. It's what we do. And look at our long term. We don't even have a long term anymore. We don't. Right now, looking at our nation, there's no long term. It's very, very short term. So, yeah, the long term view is definitely voting principally, or casting ballots principally, if you will. My view.
Yeah, it's tougher for me than that. Although I want to say the principled view is always and forever the best view. There's a big part of me wants to say that. Joel says that we haven't had a principled candidate in his lifetime. We haven't had a principled candidate in this century or the previous century. They've all been compromised one way or another. The fact of the matter is that as citizens in a Republican democracy, we're required to do the best that we can. And again, I will emphasize that the best that we can do as Christians is to keep evangelizing and building the base of Christianity in the United States. A nation that constantly shakes its fist at God is going to fall regardless of who we vote for. It's just the way it's going to be. I agree with Joel. I think that America's days are numbered. I think that's baked in the cake. I think that we could buy a little time right now, but if we don't change the culture, our voting is not going to matter. So that's kind of a cop-out. I like the principled view, but we have to have enough time, and we have to have enough leeway, elbow room, to try to change the culture.
All right, this is going to be the last question, and then I'm going to give you a chance to summarize your position with a closing statement as part of your answer to this question. So I don't know if this is fair for the last question. Is it a sin to vote for Trump?
And this is combined with my...
With your closing statement, yeah.
Yeah.
I know it's difficult, and then we'll have to maybe come back next week. So, Joel.
Yeah. Is it a sin to vote for Trump? It's very difficult for me to say that it is. My reasoning goes this way. There's all kinds of sins in the Bible that are laid out specifically. There's adultery, there's pride, there's all these things. Growing up, we had added sins, playing cards, watching movies. We added all these sins. I'm very, very sensitive about adding sins to the Bible that I don't think specifically adds. Super sensitive about that. Once you get started with that, there's just no ending. And the Pharisees had them lined up. They had some sins laid out. So it's difficult for me to say that. I believe that it is, but I cannot definitively say that it's a sin to vote for Trump. I can't do it. Maybe I'm missing something, but I can't.
Would it be a sin to vote? Oh, never mind. Joel, John, let you give your final closing statement and your response to that question.
Yeah, obviously, in that I argued in the affirmative that a Christian can vote for Trump. I don't believe it's a sin. I believe that a Christian, in following, we must follow the Bible in our lives and not sin and not engage in the sins when we're dealing with the people who are going to exercise authority over us through an election. I think we do the best that we can given the choices that we have, and that's where we are. I think that given the choices that we have, I think that the fact that we're living under judgment and needing to live our lives as peaceably and effectively as we can means that we, at least for me, I am compelled this season to vote for Trump. If I thought it was a sin, I couldn't do that.
As a quick follow-up, there are plenty of people who will say that it's an actual sin not to vote for Trump.
Oh, I won't say that.
Yeah, you're not saying that.
No, I would not.
But there are plenty of people saying that.
There are people, that's the fanaticism that I was referred to earlier, the adoration stuff, and the stuff that we witnessed in 2016 at your Election Day sermon.
And that's how soft I'm being. I'm not willing to say it's a sin to vote for Trump. There's plenty of people out there who are willing to say it's a sin not to vote for Trump.
And that's a mistake. That's a huge, you can't say that.
All right, well, a lot more that could be said. Thank you both for that. Give a round of applause here for our two interlocutors.
And for the questions. Good questions.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, great questions.
Thank you, Chris.
And we'll see if we can do this again. Let me close with a word of prayer, and we'll get ready for our worship service. Dear Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to come together. We thank you for these two men and for all the time and energy they've put into shepherding this congregation. We thank you that we can have these discussions, that we do not need to be politically correct, but we can challenge one another from Scripture and seek to serve you in righteousness. I pray you would bless this church and help us to continue to think about all things according to your word. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.